Hi, folks. Do you want to know what the evidence is around the learning practices that you're bringing to your environment and how you can get your learners to learn stuff more effectively and to retain that information for longer? This session might be for you. I'm going to be drawing on social cognitive learning theory and constructivism, and I'm just going to spam you with a bunch of key stuff that you can implement into your own teaching practice with confidence, knowing that this stuff actually helps your learners to learn material and to remember it later. So let's get into it. First up, constructivism. Constructivism theory, this one suggests that learners actively engage in their learning through interaction with their environment and application of new knowledge, new information. Your learner is drawing on all of their past experience and learning to date, and they are taking on board cherry picking information and thinking about how that applies to their own context, right? So in constructivism theory, it's emphasizing learning through experiences and reflection. The spacing effect. Cognitive psychology principle that information is contained more effectively when learning is spread out over time rather than crammed into a short period. It involves the consolidation of memory during the intervals between study sessions. And this is particularly works really well when you get to sleep and when you're asleep, your brain is actually doing all of that filing work and consolidating information that is making your capacity to retrieve that information more um, easy to do. So get some sleep is the take-home message here. Um, and also spacing out the learning information. So if you do, you teach your learners something on, say, day one in the morning, you take a break after lunch, come back to it, revisit it, right? Then you're going to be spacing out that learning on that particular topic. Then come back to it, maybe the next day or a few days later, you come back to it. That is the spacing technique, right? And that has been shown to help your learners to take on board that information and to retain it long term, be able to retrieve it for the appropriate setting later. So that's a good one. Then we have the testing effect. This theory supports the idea that actively recalling information strengthens memory and learning. It is grounded in the principle of retrieval practice, which helps learners to better retain and apply knowledge. So, the whole idea is that getting your learner to actively retrieve information and go, oh, yeah, what was that thing and how does that apply to this setting? Then that is going to really inform their learning and being tested on their capacity to do that doesn't just test what they know, but increases the likelihood that they will know that thing later, that they'll be able to retrieve that information longer term. Then we have the generation effect. This theory posits that information is better retained when learners actively generate answers or information for themselves rather than simply being presented with it. Right. So, although learners will often say something to the effect of, can you please just spoon feed me this one? I just want to turn up to a lecture and sit back and have it all just absorbed by osmosis. That might be how they're feeling, but research shows that actually getting them to do the work of generating information, generating the answers, going and hunting and finding it for themselves, that helps them to learn the thing and to remember it longer. Now, Hermann Ebbinghaus in 1885 famously came up with this forgetting curve. The concept explains that forgetting occurs rapidly during learning and after learning. But using techniques like spaced repetition can significantly reduce forgetting and enhance retention. I'm going to come back to that one in a moment, actually. And then we've got cognitive load theory. Cognitive load theory, many of you will be familiar with this one. It's suggesting that the brain basically can only process a limited amount of information at a time. Therefore, breaking down complex learning into manageable little segments can improve understanding and retention. We don't want to spam our learners with too much information because then they can't figure out which bits are important. We need to chunk it down. Okay, so that takes me to Brown, Roediger, and McDaniel. If you're out there watching this, I'm a huge fan. Basically, these chaps came up with the book which they called Make It Stick. And I really like this metaphor because that is exactly what we're after as educators. We want to help our learners to have that information stick in their brains. It's jam-packed full of evidence from so many studies, hundreds of studies that have shown over the last 70 years in particular, really showed across huge data sets what makes a difference to learning, like how people can actually learn better. What helps them to learn more or learn better and to retain that information longer. It's all there in the book. It's well worth having a wee read. But for those of you who don't have that kind of time and just want the spoon feed me please option, I'm going to go into the 7 take homes from this book as I see them. Right, so one of the most effective strategies for long-term retention is retrieval practice, which I mentioned earlier. This is recalling information from memory rather than reviewing it. This strengthens the neural connections and helps improve memory retention over time. Right, just getting the person to go, what was the thing? That's going to make them remember the thing a lot more than you just telling them the thing. Spaced repetition, we've already covered. Learning is more effective when study sessions are spaced out over time, and this technique combats forgetting and helps retain information for the long term. Now, there's interleaving. Interleaving is a word that I just do not use in my everyday vocab. So for me, this was a little bit harder for me to remember this particular term. But basically, interleaving is mixing up different topics or skills in a single study session. It's more effective than focusing on one topic at a time, like blocked practice. And this promotes deeper learning by forcing the brain to make connections between different concepts, right? You're bringing these different concepts together and interleaving them together, which speaks to the complexity of real life. Then we've got varied practice, introducing variability in learning activities, such as practicing problems with different contexts or perspectives, enhances the ability to apply knowledge in new situations. Right? So this will actually get your learners to be able to go out into the big wide world and do the thing in their different contexts. So it's really important that we vary practice. Then we've got elaboration, right? It's stretching symbol, so we want to elaborate. This refers to explaining and expanding on new information by connecting it to what you already know, right? So it's really got its roots in constructivism here. This helps deepen understanding and promotes retention. Then there's the generation effect. This is the act of trying to recall information or generate an answer. I mentioned it earlier about getting your learner to provide the answer before they are given the answer. This leads to better retention. And finally, deliberate practice. Deliberate practice involves focused, intentional, and effortful learning with the goal of improving performance. It's essential to practice skills at or just above the current level of ability, with feedback and reflection. That takes us on to a couple of hot tips. Making mistakes is a good idea, right? That's how we learn very effectively. I mean, that's not always how we learn, But that is a great way of learning because when you stuff up the thing, you often go, yeah, okay, I really get it now in my bones. I'm not going to do that again. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes we should let our learners make mistakes in safe settings and safe ways so that they can have constructive learning. And mindset and motivation. If you can make clear to your learners that the information that you're trying to impart to them aligns to their values, then they're going to have that intrinsic motivation to get on board and get engaged and to do that kind of deeper learning um, that is going to get them long-term retention. That's what the research shows. There's a whole chapter on it in Make It Stick. Right, so I don't know, maybe it's been 60 seconds or so since I told you all those 7 things. Can you actually remember what those 7 practices are just from seeing those icons on the screen now? Can you remember what they were? This is your opportunity to embed your own learning. All right, I'm just going to come back to the spacing effect and the forgetting curve. So you can see here that people, their learning drops off really quickly when they're given information. And remembering that piece of new information a minute later, an hour later, a couple of days later, gets harder and harder the further we go through time. If we interrupt that time by getting someone to retrieve that information, to apply that information by spacing out and returning to that information, each time we do that, we are strengthening the neural network on that particular topic, and we are getting the person's capacity to retrieve that information and apply it later to be much more possible long term. That's the key stuff that I wanted to fill your brain with. And now it's your opportunity. If you want to continue with this video, then now's the opportunity to try out just having a bit of a think about a critical reflection on these provocations that I've listed for you. So I'm just going to leave them up for 10 seconds each and then end the video. That's all for now. I wish you well, and may all of your learning be rich and constructive and socially, cognitively theoretical.